My name is Catherine Lowell, and for 45 years my home in Hartford, Connecticut was a symphony of life. It was the thunder of my husband William, laughing at the Sunday papers, the frantic patter of our children's feet on the hardwood floors, the sizzle of bacon on a Saturday morning. Even after William passed 5 years ago, the house held echoes of that music. I'd fill the silence with the hum of the dishwasher, the chatter of the television, and most importantly, the weekly phone calls and holiday visits from my 2 children, Andrew and Elizabeth. They were my world, the twin pillars holding up the sky of my later years. At 72, I believed my greatest role was to be their mother, their soft place to land, the keeper of the family flame. The house, paid off and filled with a lifetime of memories, was to be their inheritance, a final gift from William and me. Thanksgiving was just around the corner, and I was already planning the menu, the scent of phantom turkey and pumpkin pie already filling my imagination. I'd called them both earlier in the day, my heart swelling with a familiar maternal warmth as they confirmed they'd be driving up together. "Of course, Mother," Andrew had said, his voice smooth and reassuring. "Wouldn't miss your stuffing for the world." Elizabeth had chimed in on speakerphone, "And we have something we want to discuss with you, Mother. Something important for the future." I smiled, assuming they were going to talk about their investment portfolios, or maybe even hint at a grandchild on the way. The future, I thought, was something we would build together, just as we always had. That evening I sat in William's old leather armchair, a faded quilt over my lap, and looked at the photographs on the mantel. There was Andrew, age 8, missing his 2 front teeth and grinning proudly with a sailing trophy. There was Elizabeth, age 16, beautiful and awkward in her debutante dress, William standing beside her with a look of pure, unadulterated pride. These were not just images. They were artifacts of a life built on love and sacrifice. Every penny William and I saved, every late night we worked, it was all for them. We'd put them both through Ivy League colleges without a single student loan to their names. We'd helped with down payments on their first cars. We'd even set up a substantial life insurance policy, a final safety net to ensure that, long after I was gone, they would be secure. It was my duty, my purpose. As the grandfather clock in the hall chimed 9, I felt a deep, settled contentment. My children were successful, they were coming home, and they wanted to talk about the future. The silence of the house didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful, like the quiet intake of breath before a beautiful song. I was a lucky woman. I had no idea that the song was about to become a funeral dirge, and that the future they wanted to discuss was one that didn't include me in it. The chill in the old New England house seemed to seep into my bones a little deeper that night. I decided to fetch the heavy wool blanket from the cedar chest at the foot of my bed upstairs. As I climbed the familiar creaking stairs, my hand gliding along the smooth cherrywood banister, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My heart gave a little leap. Andrew and Elizabeth, they were a day early. What a wonderful surprise. I paused on the landing, a wide smile spreading across my face, ready to call out a greeting. But the front door opened and closed with a quiet click. Not the usual boisterous entry I was used to. Then their voices drifted up, hushed and conspiratorial, not joyful and loud. Curiosity piqued, I remained where I was, hidden from view by the angle of the staircase. "Is she asleep?" Elizabeth whispered. Her voice, usually so bright, was sharp and brittle. "Should be," Andrew replied, his tone low and businesslike. "Lights are off down here. Perfect. We can talk freely in the kitchen." I frowned. Talk freely about what? My hand froze on the banister. I should have gone down. I should have announced myself and wrapped them in hugs, dispelling the strange tension with the sheer force of my love. But some primal instinct, a cold knot of dread in my stomach, kept me rooted to the spot. I crept silently to the top of the stairs, my slippered feet making no sound, and leaned my ear toward the open space of the foyer, from which I could hear their conversation from the kitchen table with perfect, horrifying clarity. "Okay, so I looked into it again," Andrew said. "The policy with Prudential is for $500,000. Combined with the sale of the house, which should easily fetch another $400,000 in this market, we're looking at nearly $1 million, split 2 ways." A beat of silence. I could almost hear the gears turning in their heads, the cold calculus of greed. My own mind was blank, unable to process the words. Prudential? The house sale? What about funeral costs? Elizabeth asked, her voice pragmatic, stripped of all emotion. We can't let that eat into the principal. I saw a segment on TV about cost-effective arrangements. A simple pine box, direct cremation. There's no need for all the pomp and circumstance. Mother always said she didn't want a fuss. A bitter, metallic taste filled my mouth. I had said that, yes, but in the context of love, of not wanting them to be burdened by sorrow. I never imagined they would use my words as a justification for cheapness, to maximize their profit from my death. Exactly, Andrew agreed. We can handle the arrangements in a week, tops. Get the death certificate, file the claim, and list the house with a realtor by the end of the month. The sooner we liquidate, the better. My car lease is up, and frankly, I'm tired of living in that cramped apartment. I felt the blood drain from my face. I gripped the banister to keep from collapsing. My knees felt weak, my breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a bad dream. This was my son and my daughter, the two halves of my heart, sitting at the very table where they'd learned to eat with a fork, planning my funeral as if it were a hostile corporate takeover. They were not discussing my future. They were discussing my end. They saw me not as their mother, but as a walking, breathing bank account with a stubbornly slow maturation date. The woman they were talking about, this burden whose passing would be their financial windfall, was a stranger to me, and yet she was me. The love I felt for them just moments before curdled into something cold and heavy, a lump of ice forming in my chest where my heart used to be. I didn't move from the top of the stairs for what felt like an eternity. I listened as they transitioned from the logistics of my death to complaining about their jobs and the price of organic kale, the sheer banality of it all making the preceding conversation even more monstrous. Eventually they went to their old bedrooms, the house falling silent once more. But this was a new kind of silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was predatory. It was the silence of the void. I stumbled back into my room, not bothering with the light, and sank onto the edge of my bed. The wool blanket I'd come for lay forgotten. The cold I felt now was not something a blanket could fix. It was a core-deep chill, the frost of absolute betrayal. I sat there in the dark, the moonlight casting long shadows across the floor, and I wept. But these weren't the hot, cleansing tears of grief. They were cold, silent tears of disillusionment. I cried for the mother I had been, the naive, loving woman who believed her children's affection was unconditional. I cried for the children I had raised, remembering them as toddlers with scraped knees and sticky fingers, and I couldn't reconcile those memories with the callous strangers downstairs. How had this happened? Where had I gone so wrong? The photos on my dresser seemed to mock me. Andrew and Elizabeth at the Grand Canyon, squinting into the sun. The three of us at William's funeral, huddled together, a unit of grief. Had they been faking it even then? Had they looked at their grieving mother and seen only a depreciating asset? The hours ticked by. Sleep was an impossible dream. My mind, a whirlwind of pain and anger, began to clear, solidifying around a single hard thought. They had already buried me. In their hearts and minds, I was already gone. They were just waiting for my body to catch up. The grief began to recede, and in its place, something else began to grow. It was a tiny, cold spark at first, but with every remembered insult from their kitchen conversation, pine box, liquidate, cramped apartment, it grew brighter and hotter. It was anger, a pure, righteous, and utterly unfamiliar rage. They had made a business decision about my life. Very well. It was time for me to make one of my own. I thought of the life insurance policy, that $500,000. It was meant to be their security, their future. William and I had called it the rainy day fund for them, but the storm had arrived early, and it was raining down on me. They coveted that money. They were willing to wish me dead for it. The thought, which had been so painful just hours before, now became an instrument of power. That money wasn't theirs. Not yet. It was mine. My name was on the policy. My life was the commodity it was based on. As dawn began to break, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and gray, my plan began to form. It was audacious, it was terrifying, and it felt more alive than I had in years. They wanted me gone? Fine. I would disappear. But I wouldn't be disappearing into a cheap coffin in some cut-rate crematorium. I would disappear into the world. I would take the very money they were banking on, and I would use it to live. I would use their greed as the engine for my own happiness. A small, humorless smile touched my lips for the first time that night. They wanted to plan my final arrangements. They had no idea I was about to make my own. The next morning, I moved like an automaton. I made coffee, my hands steady, my face a mask of placid maternal calm. When Andrew and Elizabeth came down for breakfast, I greeted them with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "You're up early, Mother," Andrew said, pouring himself a cup. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, the simple truth hiding a universe of meaning. "So excited for you to be here." They exchanged a quick, knowing glance I would have missed a day ago. Now, it was as clear as a confession. They thought my excitement was for their important discussion, their gentle nudging of me toward the grave. We made small talk. I asked about their work, their friends. I played the part of the devoted mother perfectly, all the while feeling like a spy in my own home. They left before lunch, promising to be back the day before Thanksgiving. "You get some rest, Mother," Elizabeth said, hugging me at the door. Her embrace felt like a cage. "We just want to spend time with you." The hypocrisy was so staggering, it almost made me laugh. As soon as their car was out of sight, I went to my office. I didn't call a travel agent. I called my financial advisor, Mr. Sterling. He had managed Williams and my affairs for 30 years and was a kind, meticulous man who still wore a bow tie to work every day. "Catherine," he said, his voice warm with familiarity, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" "I need to make some changes, Arthur," I said, my own voice firm, devoid of its usual tremor. "Significant changes. I'd like to schedule an appointment as soon as possible." We met the next day in his quiet, wood-paneled office. I laid it all out. I wanted to cash out my life insurance policy. I wanted to liquidate a portion of my stock portfolio and my mutual funds. I wanted to set up a new bank account at a different institution, one to which my children had no historical links. I wanted to understand the tax implications and the fastest way to access a large amount of liquid cash. Arthur listened patiently, his pen still, his brow furrowed in concern. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Catherine, this is highly unusual. Cashing out a whole life policy comes with significant penalties, and liquidating these assets will trigger a substantial capital gains tax. May I ask what this is for? Is everything all right?" I looked him straight in the eye. I wasn't going to tell him the whole sordid story. It was too humiliating, but he needed to understand my resolve. "Everything has changed, Arthur," I said softly. "William and I built this nest egg to provide for our children's future. It has become clear that their vision of that future and mine are incompatible. I am 72 years old, and I have decided to reprioritize my own." The conviction in my voice must have been convincing. He saw it wasn't a whim. He nodded slowly, then turned to his computer. "Very well," he said, his voice shifting from concerned friend to efficient professional. "Let's look at the numbers. The surrender value on the prudential policy is lower than the death benefit, of course, but it's still a considerable sum, around $380,000. He walked me through the process, the forms I'd need to sign, the waiting periods. He explained how to wire the funds to a new account. For 2 hours, we worked. I signed document after document, each stroke of the pen a declaration of independence. When I finally stood up to leave, Arthur shook my hand. "Catherine, whatever you're planning, I hope it brings you happiness." "Oh, I think it will, Arthur," I said, a genuine smile finally reaching my eyes. "I think it will." I walked out of that office not as Catherine Lowell, the grieving widow and doting mother, but as Catherine Lowell, the CEO of the rest of my own life. The war chest was being gathered. The first phase of my plan was complete. The next 2 weeks were a strange, surreal dance of deception and preparation. I spoke to Andrew and Elizabeth on the phone, discussing Thanksgiving table settings and who was bringing the green bean casserole. I feigned a slight cough, complaining of feeling a bit tired, a bit run down. It was a cruel, calculated move, designed to feed their narrative. Let them think I was fading. Let them think their inheritance was drawing nearer. Their voices over the phone were laced with a counterfeit concern that was now painfully obvious. "You get some rest, Mother," Elizabeth would say. "Don't worry about a thing. We'll be there soon." Each word was a twist of the knife, but it also hardened my resolve. While they were envisioning my decline, I was meticulously planning my ascent. I spent hours online, not looking at retirement homes, but at world cruises. The idea, born of anger, now blossomed into a thrilling reality. A ship that would take me from port to port, a floating home where someone else made the bed and cooked the meals. I found the perfect one, a 180-day journey, departing from New York City, circumnavigating the globe. The Mediterranean, the Suez Canal, the temples of Asia, the islands of the South Pacific. It was the trip William and I had always dreamed of taking, but had always put off, saying we'd go when we retired, when the kids were settled, when. The excuses had piled up until it was too late. It wasn't too late for me. I booked it with my new credit card, the one linked to my secret bank account where the funds from my liquidated life were now sitting, a formidable and liberating sum. I packed a single large suitcase. I didn't take family photos. I didn't take the old quilt from my armchair. I packed for a new life, not a continuation of the old one. Light dresses for the tropics, a warm coat for the fjords of Norway, comfortable shoes for walking through ancient cities I'd only ever seen in books. On the final day, the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, my house was spotless. The silver was polished, ready for a feast that would never happen. In the center of the kitchen table, where my children had plotted my demise, I placed a simple white envelope. Inside was a short handwritten note on my best stationery. It read, "My dearest Andrew and Elizabeth, something unexpected has come up, and I've had to go away for a while. Don't worry about me. The house is yours to look after. I will be in touch. Love, Mother." The ambiguity was deliberate. Let them wonder. Let them worry, for the first time, not about my death, but about my life. A car service I had pre-booked arrived at 5 a.m. I took one last look around the home that had contained my entire world. For a moment, a pang of sadness hit me. I was leaving behind 45 years of memories. But then I thought of the conversation I had overheard, and the sadness was washed away by a feeling of profound relief. I wasn't leaving my home. I was escaping my prison. As I closed the front door behind me for the last time, the quiet click echoed the sound I had heard that fateful night. But this time, it wasn't the sound of an ending, it was the sound of a beginning. I got into the car, didn't look back, and told the driver to take me to the New York City cruise terminal. My journey to the rest of my life was waiting. The first few days on the cruise ship, the Serene Odyssey, were a blur of disorientation and wonder. After a lifetime in Hartford, the sheer, overwhelming presence of the ocean was intoxicating. I had a small but elegant stateroom with a private balcony, and I spent hours just sitting there, watching the endless expanse of turquoise water meet the brilliant blue sky. The air tasted of salt and freedom. The ship was a city unto itself, filled with people from all over the world, none of whom knew me as a mother, a widow, or a burden. To them, I was just Catherine, the woman with the quiet smile in the ship's library, or the one enjoying a glass of Chardonnay at sunset. For the first time in decades, my identity was entirely my own. I spoke to strangers. I took a watercolor class. I even tried my luck at the casino, laughing as I lost $20. I felt the tight knot of anger and grief in my chest slowly begin to unwind. 1 week into the journey, as we sailed through the impossibly blue waters of the Caribbean, I decided it was time. I went to the ship's gift shop and browsed the rack of postcards. I didn't choose one with a picture of the ship itself. Instead, I found a perfect glossy image, a vibrant, sun-drenched beach in Turks and Caicos, with pristine white sand and impossibly clear water. It was the picture of paradise. I took it to a writing desk in a quiet lounge overlooking the sea. I chose my words with the care of a poet crafting a sonnet. I didn't want to be angry or accusatory. That would give them power. I wanted to be cheerful, breezy, and utterly devastating. On the back, in my neatest cursive, I wrote, "Dear Andrew and Elizabeth, guess my cough was more serious than I thought. The doctor recommended a long trip to a warmer climate to recover. The sea air is doing wonders for my health. The food is divine, and I've never felt better. Thinking of you both. Love, Mother." It was a masterpiece of passive aggression. Every word was a carefully aimed dart. The doctor recommended, implying a medical emergency they were unaware of. Never felt better, directly contradicting their hopes. And the closing, "Thinking of you both," was the final perfect twist of the knife. Then came the masterstroke. I addressed it to my home address. I knew they would be there, probably frantic, having found my note. They would have called the police, the hospitals. They would be in the midst of their panicked performance of the concerned children. And then, this postcard would arrive. A message from the woman they thought was dying, showing her very much alive and, more importantly, spending their money. But I wasn't finished. I took out another postcard, this one of a lavish buffet spread on the ship's Lido deck. I addressed it to my financial advisor, Mr. Sterling. The message was much simpler. "Arthur, it's bringing me more happiness than you can imagine. Thank you for everything. Best, Catherine." I walked to the ship's post office, a small counter near guest services, and handed the 2 cards to the clerk. As she stamped them with the ship's postmark, a symbol of my new transient life, I felt a giddy sense of triumph. The first volley had been fired. I could almost picture their faces, the confusion turning to dawning horror as they read my cheerful note and realized the truth. The ghost they were waiting to collect on had just sent them a postcard from paradise. My journey became a tapestry woven from new experiences and perfectly crafted messages home. Each new port of call was an opportunity for me to live more deeply and to chronicle that life for the audience of 2 I had left behind. They had wanted to shrink my world to the size of a pine box. I was now making the entire globe my backyard, and I was sending them proof of it, one 4x 6-inch piece of glossy cardstock at a time. From Lisbon, I sent a postcard of the Belém Tower. The message read, "Fell in love with the architecture here. It's amazing how structures built hundreds of years ago are still so strong and standing. A lesson in endurance. Met a lovely couple from Australia. We danced until midnight. Who knew I still had it in me? Hope the furnace in the house is working. It can be tricky. Love, Mother." The subtext was clear. I was strong, I was enduring, I was dancing, and I was reminding them of the mundane responsibilities of the house they now had to maintain. A house that was costing them money instead of making them any. From Rome, after walking through the Forum, I sent a picture of the Colosseum. Stood in the heart of an ancient empire today, so much history. Makes you realize how short life is, and how important it is to live it to the fullest without waiting for anyone's permission. The pasta is to die for, literally. Thinking of you. Love, Mother. Every postcard was a pinprick. Every cheerful sign-off was a reminder of what they had lost. I imagined the scene at home. The initial panic must have subsided, replaced by a simmering, impotent fury. They would have called Prudential, only to be told by a polite but firm representative that Mrs. Catherine Lowell had closed her policy and received the full surrender value. They would have checked my bank accounts, finding them drained. They would be stuck in my house, paying the property taxes and the utilities, waiting for another postcard to drop through the mail slot like a small, colorful hand grenade. I pictured them arguing, blaming each other. Andrew, furious that his get-rich-quick scheme had backfired so spectacularly. Elizabeth, calculating the cost of the cruise and realizing with horror that I was spending their inheritance on champagne and shore excursions. While they were trapped in the cold Connecticut winter, I was crossing the Suez Canal, watching massive container ships pass by as I sipped mint tea on my balcony. I took a photo of myself, smiling serenely on a camel in front of the pyramids at Giza, and had it printed onto a postcard in Alexandria. "Egypt is magical," wrote a camel named Patience today. Something I'm learning a lot about on this trip. It's funny, the things you think are valuable turn out not to be, and the things you take for granted become the most precious. The world is so much bigger than I ever imagined from my armchair. Hope you're both well. Love, Mother. I wasn't just punishing them. I was educating them. I was holding up a mirror to their greed and showing them the vibrant, joyful life they had tried to extinguish. My revenge wasn't a single act, but a continuous, unfolding narrative of my own happiness. With every mile the serene Odyssey sailed, I was moving further and further away from the woman who had wept at the top of the stairs, and closer to the woman I was always meant to be. The final leg of my journey took me back across the Atlantic, a leisurely sail from the sunny shores of Spain. By the time we docked in Charleston, South Carolina for a 2-week stay before the final disembarkation in New York, I was a different person. The Hartford mother, Catherine Lowell, was a ghost. In her place was Kate, a world traveler who had friends in every time zone, a portfolio of incredible memories, and a deep, abiding peace. The anger that had fueled my departure had long since burned away, leaving behind not emptiness, but a profound and lasting serenity. I realized my revenge had never truly been about punishing my children. It was about saving myself. One afternoon, sitting on a bench in a quiet, sun-dappled square, watching the palmetto fronds sway in the gentle breeze, I knew it was time for the last postcard. I had saved a special one for this. It wasn't a tourist photo. It was a picture I had taken myself from a horse-drawn carriage, a simple, lovely shot of Charleston's Rainbow Row, the pastel-colored historic houses glowing in the afternoon light. It was a picture of a new home, symbolizing a new dawn. I turned it over. My message was short. There was no more subtext, no more passive aggression, just a simple, unadorned truth. Andrew and Elizabeth, my journey is coming to an end soon. This trip has taught me that my life, and the resources William and I accumulated, were never meant to be an inheritance for you to wait for. They were the tools for me to live with. I have used them to do just that. I have seen the world. I have made new friends. I have been happier than I have been in a very long time. I forgive you, not for your sakes, but for mine. I release you. Do not try to contact me. My plans do not include Connecticut. The house is yours. Sell it. Split the money. Consider it your final inheritance. I hope you use it to find some happiness of your own. You will not hear from me again. Goodbye, Kate. I signed it Kate deliberately. Catherine was their mother. Kate was her own woman. As I dropped the postcard into a mailbox on a cobblestone street, a warm breeze carrying the scent of jasmine, I felt the last invisible chain break. I had already made my arrangements. I had fallen in love with the historic charm and warm spirit of Charleston. Using the last of my significant funds, I had purchased a small, elegant flat in a restored historic building south of Broad Street, with a private piazza that overlooked a garden of camellias and creeping fig. My new life was waiting for me. I didn't know if my children would change, if they would ever feel remorse, but it no longer mattered. Their story was their own to write now. Mine was a tale of betrayal and rebirth, of a funeral that became a round-the-world celebration. They had planned to take my money to start their lives. Instead, I took it and started mine. And as I sipped a glass of sweet tea on my new piazza that evening, I knew with absolute certainty that I was the one who had inherited everything.